Okay, so good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jennifer Dixon, and I am Air Quality Division's Planning Policy Coordinator. But tonight I'm going to be helping moderate the meeting and then also helping with the question and answer at the end. But before we get into all of that, want to just make sure everybody knows we are here tonight to talk about a proposed air permit for Fritz Products Incorporated. We're going to get going on a little bit of the housekeeping information before we get started on the meat of the meeting. So just for folks who are new to our Eagle online meetings, we do mute your lines during the meeting, and we also do record the meeting for viewing later on YouTube. So we will share that link out once it is ready. With everybody who is on the meeting tonight, we'll also post it online just to make sure anybody who wasn't able to join us can view the meeting if they would like to. We'll go over this a couple of times, but just to get people started, because sometimes once we get into the informational part of the presentation, people like to be ready to ask their questions. So there's a few different ways that we can ask questions. Today, you can either type your question into the question and answer box. Once we get to the official question and answer period of the night, we'll remind you how to raise your hand so you can ask your question verbally. That's also awesome. If we have folks calling in, we'll just remind everybody that they can use #2 on their phone to raise their hand, so they'll still be able to ask questions during the question and answer part of the night. I always like to talk about how things are going to work or how the meeting will be set up. So the first part of the meeting is what we call our informational session. And basically what that is we have a couple of our key staff talk about the proposed project and the work that our air quality division did to bring a draft permit to all of you tonight. And then once we get done with that presentation, we'll get right into that question and answer where hopefully we can provide clarity, answer any questions that you might have. We'll do that until about 7 o'clock or whenever questions are done, whatever comes first. So if we get to 7, we might not get to all the questions. We'll definitely respond back to people directly if we don't get your questions answered during the Q&A. So then around 7 o'clock, we'll shift over to the official hearing part of the night. So I just like to tell people this a lot of times when we're in the hearing portion, if people are giving their comments, they might ask a question in their comment, which is totally fine. But during the hearing portion, we won't be responding to any of those questions. So it's kind of those two distinct portions of the night, informational session, Q&A, and then we'll get right into that hearing where we'll take those official comments on the record. And we'll go over this again too, but just wanted to let folks know about that. One of the things we also like to do is just go over some group norms for these public meetings. We developed this slide with a group of environmental advocates in the Flint area, and we really have enjoyed using it to try to set the stage to make sure that these meetings are productive for everybody. So one of the things we like to just talk about is making sure that we're all listening actively with an ear to understanding. So that goes for our staff here, and then also, for our audience members. We definitely want you to ask questions and request clarification. So if you have a question, if something isn't clear when we're talking about it, definitely ask us to clarify that. We want to make sure that we're criticizing ideas and not individuals during the meeting. Of course, it goes without saying that we should be communicating respectfully with each other, and then take space, make space. And basically what that means is we just want to make sure that everyone who has a question gets an opportunity to ask, and anyone who has comments, gets an opportunity to provide those comments. So that's a lot of the housekeeping. We are going to go over the agenda for tonight, but before I start doing that, I'm going to introduce all of our Eagle staff that we have on with us tonight. But the first person I want to introduce is Annette Switzer. Annette is our division director here at the Air Quality Division, and she is the decision maker on this project, which she will talk to you about in a second. But I know she wants to welcome everybody to the meeting. So Annette, whenever you're ready, go ahead and take the mic.
Thanks, Jen. We're grateful to have you all here joining us online this evening. As Jen mentioned, I'm Annette Switzer, the Air Quality Division Director and the decision maker for this permit action. Engaging with community members like all of you is a crucial part of our permitting process. The feedback we receive often leads to meaningful improvements. Tonight, you'll hear how we evaluate the technical information submitted in the permit application and learn about the types of comments we can and cannot consider in our decision making. Ambrosia, our lead permit engineer, will provide additional details on the draft of the permit, highlighting sections that may be of interest to you. We encourage you to ask questions, share your thoughts on the proposed permit, and as the decision maker, I'll be listening carefully to tonight's discussion. Thank you again for being here. And Jen, I'll turn it back over to you so you can kick off the conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. I appreciate you. So if I can have my other air quality division staff turn your cameras on. So we're going to just do a quick little introduction of folks. So the first person that I want to introduce you to tonight is Ambrosia Brown. So Ambrosia also goes by Amber. She will be doing a lot of the informational session for you tonight. She is our lead permit engineer on this project, but it goes without saying that we can't bring these to the public without having a team of our staff work on it. And that part is also really important. So I want to introduce you to some of the other folks that we have on tonight. You'll also hear from John Lamb. John is our inspector out of our Detroit district office. So this is his facility, Fritz. And he will be talking a little bit about his inspection process, kind of how we do things from the inspector's point of view. I also have on Stephanie Hengspa. So Stephanie is in our air modeling section. That's, I guess, not technically a section, but she's one of our air modelers. So her primary role, and you'll hear more about this as the evening goes on, is to help when we get projects like this in. Her job is to use a computer model to kind of futurecast what this project might look like if it was installed, to make sure that it would meet those rules and regulations. So she works with Amber on some of that aspect of it. The other folks that I have on tonight are Mike Deppa. So Mike is one of our toxicologists, and toxicologists in the air quality division, kind of in a nutshell, one of their big responsibilities, of course, is helping with permit applications. But another thing that they do is develop health-based screening levels for a group of pollutants called toxic air contaminants. So Amber's going to be talking a little bit more about those different pollutants later on tonight, but Mike will be on to answer questions as well. Then I have Susan Kilmer. Susan is our air monitoring section supervisor, manager. I might get that wrong. One of those. She works, she heads up our air monitoring section, and she would be here to talk about questions folks might have about air monitoring stations and things like that in the area around this proposed permits. So one other person I want to just make sure I introduce is Caitlin DeVries. Caitlin is with our environmental support division, and she is essential in making sure that these online meetings and any in-person meetings we have run smoothly. So Caitlin, thanks for helping us on the background there. So if my air staff wants to turn their cameras off, except for Amber, if you don't mind leaving yours on, because I'm going to pass the torch over to you in just a minute. So just going over the agenda again, like I mentioned before, we'll do that information session. You're going to hear primarily from Amber a lot about what air quality division does in general, and then some specifics about the permit review, the application review that went into us getting here tonight. Hopefully we'll answer some questions that you might have during that, but then if we don't, we'll get right into that question and answer session after that. And then, like I mentioned earlier, 7 o'clock, or once you guys are done asking questions, whatever comes first, we'll shift over into that public hearing portion where we'll be taking your comments on the record. After that part, we'll talk a little bit more about how you can submit an official comment. You do not need to submit a comment tonight. If you aren't ready to do that, it's totally fine. If you do one tonight and you want to do another one, that's also completely acceptable. We have a variety of ways that you can submit those comments, so we'll talk about those as well. I'll also let you know where you can find more information about this project. If you want to dig a little deeper into some of the things we talk about tonight, I'll let you know where you can find that. And then I'll also let you know how you can get a hold of our staff that we have here tonight. We're happy to have one-on-one conversations with folks as well. All right, so with that being said, I am going to go ahead and let Amber take over the presentation and kind of go through this information session. So Amber, whenever you're ready, go ahead.
All right. Thanks, Jen. As Jen said, my name is Amber. I'm the lead permit engineer who reviewed the application to install for Fritz Products. I work with a team of air quality staff here, including some of those on our panel, to review applications, including the Fritz application. But before we get into the details of the project, I just want to talk a little bit about what the Air Quality Division does and how the permitting process works. Air pollution comes from many different types of sources, including power plants, basically anything that burns fuel like vehicles, and various industrial sources. The overall mission of AQD is to protect public health and the environment. And we do this by using our authority under state and federal laws through regulation of industrial sources. So there's a lot of things we do. So let's go over a high level here. We monitor levels of air pollutants. We look at toxic air contaminants to make sure the public health is protected. We conduct inspections of facilities to make sure they comply with permits and any other rules that might apply to them. And we review applications and write permits for sources of air pollutants. We make sure that the proposed project complies with state and federal rules to protect public health. Part of our role is to regulate and to permit industrial sources of air pollution, such as power plants, auto assembly plants, steel mills, and the Fritz facility. We do this by reviewing permit applications submitted by these industrial sources. Now, there are some things that the draft permit does not cover and we're not able to regulate. These include zoning, noise, traffic on public roads. And if you have anything, any of these topics that you want to address, you'll have to call your local government and you can talk to them about those concerns. Our responsibility is to evaluate the project as proposed to ensure it meets all air quality rules that apply. If the project meets those rules, we are required to issue them an air permit. So to make sure a company is meeting air quality rules and regulations, we require them to have a permit to install for the equipment. From the time a company applies for a permit to when we publish it for a draft for public comment, air quality staff takes part in a thorough evaluation of what the company is asking for. This process is highly detailed and often takes months to complete, but I'd like to give you a simple overview of the process. So first, the company decides that they want to install, modify, construct any source of air emissions. Then the company submits a permit to install application. Applications vary in length and contain technical details about the project. The application is then reviewed by an engineer like myself to decide if the request can meet state and federal air quality rules. This review is detailed and took months to complete. The Fritz application was submitted in August for reference. During the review, other air quality staff were involved to help review the different parts of the application. And many of these people are on our panel. So you can ask them questions directly about the review that we conducted. This includes the review of toxic air contaminants, also known as TACs. We also looked at emissions and how they impact the surrounding community through modeling. As previously discussed, Stephanie's on the panel. She worked on that. And so if all these rules and regulations are met, then the engineer, in this case me, creates a draft permit. A permit is a legally binding document and contains requirements, like basically rules, the company must follow to show that the equipment will be installed and operated as we reviewed. If public comment is required, then draft permit is posted for the public to comment on. Public comment is an important part of the permitting process. Once the comment period ends, we evaluate every comment submitted, and they are treated the same regardless of how they're submitted. So whether you send an email, whether you leave a voicemail, whether you leave a comment during the hearing, we will review them all the same way. And the comments can lead to changes in the permit and in the final decision on what to do with the application. Finally, a decision is made on the permit application. This decision could be to approve the permit as drafted, approve the permit with changes, or to deny the permit completely. So this decision is based on whether the proposed project can meet the air quality regulations. So what is the application requesting? So Fritz is an existing facility that uses aluminum metal. They've submitted an application for a sweat furnace. This specific type of furnace, is currently owned by a different company nearby. And Fritz's current process involves physically transporting aluminum from that existing furnace to their current location. Fritz wants to skip this step and purchase the furnace for themselves and move this material to their own site. So this is a map that shows the current location of the furnace marked by the circle. And this is the proposed location of the furnace, of Fritz location on Marion Avenue, which is about 1.5 miles southeast. So at its current location, this furnace is allowed 4 pounds per hour of particulate emission rate, which is the equivalent of about 17.5 tons a year. The proposed new permit lowers these allowed emissions by 90% to 0.4 pound per hour and 1.75 tons per year. However, I want to point out that Fritz was not giving any credit for this decrease in potential emissions from their furnace during the current permit application review. So we just looked at it like it was a brand new furnace, new to the area. These are all new emissions. What's the worst case? And they had to demonstrate that that would meet all the requirements, rules, and regulations in place to protect public health. So since this is an application for a furnace that's already currently operating in the area, it might be helpful to discuss what would happen if the permit was granted versus what would happen if the permit was not granted. So if the draft permit was issued, the amount of pollutants the furnace would be allowed to emit would be reduced. And overall, as I had specified, we were proposing a 90% reduction in the allowed particulate emissions. And particulate emissions are of special concern, we understand, to the public in this area. If approved, remember once the furnace was removed from its current location, the existing permit would be voided. So the current company could not legally install and operate another furnace without applying for a new permit and undergoing another stringent review. The old permit would be null and void. And we also want to point out that currently this step in Fritz process involves trucking metal from the current location of the furnace to the Fritz site. So if the permit was approved, this truck hauling step would no longer be necessary. So although we don't specifically regulate truck traffic, we know it's a concern to residents, and it also does reduce emissions from the trucks themselves. Now, if a permit was not issued, what would that mean? Well, the current permit would remain active. The furnace would be allowed to continue operating at its current location under its current permit with the current allowed emissions. The truck traffic associated with that part of the process wouldn't be reduced. So now that we are talking about the furnace, I know that maybe some of you don't know what a sweat furnace is. I think most of us don't. So I'm going to discuss what a sweat furnace is so everyone kind of knows what the project is we're talking about. So a sweat furnace separates out a certain metal from the other materials, in this case, aluminum. And this is because aluminum melts at a lower temperature than the rest of the metals in the scrap. So once the furnace temperature is high enough, the aluminum melts, drops out, and that material can be put into molds. The proposed furnace has 3 natural gas burners to provide the needed heat for this process. So what's the overall process we're looking at permitting here? Well, Before the metal is the scrap metal goes into the furnace, it is pre-cleaned to remove impurities. It then goes into the furnace, as discussed, where the aluminum is heated up and can be separated. The exhaust from this furnace is sent through a pollution control device called an afterburner to further reduce pollutants before being exhausted out of the stack. And as discussed, the metal that comes off the furnace then goes into air-cooled molds, which then form bars that can be used further in the process. So now that we've talked about what Fritz is requesting, let's talk about the review of a permit application. Specifically, what our evaluations include and do not include. So it takes a team of staff with different expertise to review all the different parts of the application. I will discuss our work in more detail in the upcoming slides, but I just want to give you a quick overview before we really dive in. So we completed a thorough review of the regulations. So this is to ensure that all state and federal rules were evaluated and applied appropriately. We also evaluated the proposed air emissions. This includes checking emission calculations and ensuring pollutants were restricted. And we also did a review of air toxics to make sure the toxic air contaminants met health-based screening levels. So now, when we talk about air toxics, people often bring up Rule 228. Rule 228 is one of our 10 air toxic rules. It only applies to air toxic contaminants, and it only applies when all other air toxic rules don't apply. So in this case, there are no toxics that fell under that category. Rule 228 did not apply. As part of the review, we also did air modeling for criteria pollutants. When we talk about air modeling, we sometimes get questions about whether cumulative impact assessments are done as part of an air permit application review. Currently, we don't have any state or federal regulations that include cumulative impact assessments related to permitting, so they're not required or included in our review. Now, as part of the application review, we need to make sure that Fritz's proposed project meets all rules and regulations. So I'm going to talk a little bit more detail about different parts of the review in the upcoming slides. What pollutants are regulated? So on this slide, I will talk about the categories or groups of different air pollutants. The first group is criteria pollutants. This is a small group of well-studied and regulated pollutants that include sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, carbon monoxide, volatile organic compounds, and particulates. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, sets national ambient air quality standards, which we refer to as NAAQS. So remember, that's what we are saying when we say NAAQS. The standards are concentrations of pollutants that are considered protective of public health and the environment. The next category of air pollutants are hazardous air pollutants, which we call HAPs. They're a larger group of pollutants. They are known or suspected to cause health effects or environmental effects. We regulate these pollutants through federal regulations. If specific regulations apply to a proposed facility, as in this case, then the review includes making sure that these pollutants meet the federal regulation. The next category is toxic air contaminants, or TACs. They are a much larger group of pollutants covered by Michigan rules. They include almost any 9 criteria pollutant, including hazardous air pollutants that we just mentioned. Our rules are set up so toxicologists have set health-based screening levels for these pollutants. Toxic pollutants being released must meet these rules. And I'll talk a little bit more about these different pollutants in the next few slides. This table shows the level of some criteria pollutants Fritz proposes to release if the sweat furnace project moves forward. When looking at the table, we've listed the pollutants on the left-hand column, and the right-hand column shows the proposed emissions from the Fritz project. Now, I want to point out these are worst case or maximum amount of pollutants that could be released if the equipment was used 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Like we consider worst case. Now, although the operating of the furnace in this way may not be realistic, we look at the worst case to make sure that even running at these maximum capacity all the time kind of situation would still not cause a violation of any requirement in place to protect public health. The middle column on this table shows what the furnace is currently allowed to emit at its existing site. As you can see, the potential emissions from the furnace would be staying the same or going down for all of these pollutants. The greatest reduction being for particulate emissions, which is going down from 17.5 ton per year to 1.75. So I'm just going to pause for a moment so you guys can take a look at this and I can get another drink of water. In the next two slides, we will take a closer look at how the other groups of pollutants, hazardous air pollutants, and toxic air contaminants were also reviewed for this project. And remember that if you want more time to look at these slides, they will be posted online. Jen's going to be sending out the link. So as mentioned earlier, there's a federal regulation that applies to the furnace. As part of the developing of that regulation, EPA reviewed health impacts of the hazardous air pollutants released during aluminum production activities. The rule requires that these pollutants be controlled and their release minimized as much as possible. Our job was to determine, based on what the company is requesting, if the furnace would be subject to the federal rules, and if so, incorporate these requirements into the draft permit. In this case, we determined that the project is subject to the federal rule and the requirements were added to the proposed permit. These conditions include operating the pollution control equipment and specific limits on dioxin and furan pollutants. Now, I want to discuss air contaminants and health-based screening levels in a little bit more detail. The screening levels are developed to protect against health issues like developing cancer or breathing problems. When we're performing our review, we look at toxic air contaminants that could be released into the air and compare these to against their health-based screening limits, often using computer dispersion modeling. When we do our review of toxic air contaminants, we also assume, again, worst case scenario, operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Based on that review, the emissions would still have to not violate the health-based screening limits. So what is modeling? So why is it so important to the review of a permit application? Computer modeling predicts what concentration people in the area could be exposed to under the worst case scenarios, as previously discussed. The modeling simulates a grid of virtual air monitors surrounding the facility. This allows the highest ground level concentration to be determined no matter its location. And this is often right on the property line for a company. Each virtual monitor must be below the screening level for the project to move forward. If even one virtual monitor is over, the project cannot be approved. In this case, criteria pollutant modeling was done for PM 2.5, which was based on the worst case emissions from the sweat furnace. After the model generated the worst case impacts, they were compared to the significant impact level, or SIL, which is based on the National Ambient Air Quality Standards set by EPA. The modeling showed the predicted impacts of PM 2.5 to be below their respective impact levels. The project is therefore able to move forward. When below impact levels, it tells us that the project is not expected to have any significant impact on the area's ability to meet the national ambient air quality standards. This method is one of the existing legal options for allowing smaller projects to move forward. This allows them to meet permitting requirements for NACs, and it applies to all areas even if the current monitoring data is not showing compliance with the NACs. Oops. So you may have heard that Eagle has sent recommendations to EPA stating that based on information we have, Kalamazoo and Wayne counties should be designated as being non-attainment with the standard for particulate matter less than 2.5 microns in diameter. Although Wayne County has not been officially designated as being non-attainment, and that would happen for at least a year, it's well known that the area monitors have been measuring concentrations of PM 2.5 over the new standard of 9 micrograms per cubic meter. So if that's the case, why are we considering this draft permit including particulate emissions? So when we look at modeling for a project like this, we start with the most restrictive type of limit that we can compare it to. If the model meets that most restrictive level, known as the significant impact level, or SIL, we know that the project will not contribute or cause a violation of the standard. Basically, its impact is too small to make a difference either way. Because the standard is based on a concentration of the pollutant in outdoor air, it may be helpful to visualize it this way. So this is a large circle that represents the National Ambient Air Quality Standard for PM 2.5 as a concentration in the outdoor air. The level that the impact must be below to be considered too small to make a difference was also lowered when the National Ambient Air Quality Standard was made more restrictive, making it harder to meet. So now the impact level is 1.4% of the National Ambient Air Quality Standard. Due to the current monitored concentration, the worst case concentration from any project must be less than this 1.4% of the existing standard, or the project cannot move forward in this area. EPA allows impacts that are below the significant impact level to be added. This is because they are small enough that they are not expected to have any significant impact on the area's ability to meet the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. It would not cause or contribute to any violation of the standard. This method is one of the existing legal options for allowing smaller projects to meet permitting requirements related to the NACs. So for the next step, let's talk about what a permit actually is, and then I will give you a little bit more detail about what is proposed in the draft permit for Fritz. A permit is a legally enforceable document with a list of requirements called conditions that a company must comply with. Think of it like a set of rules a company must follow. The requirements in the permit ensure that the project operates as described in the application and the way it was reviewed by myself and the rest of the AQD permitting team. A permit has requirements like emission limits, material limits, operating parameters, and other monitoring, record keeping, and reporting. The proposed draft permit for Fritz includes the following requirements. There are pollutant limits for the amounts of particulates of different sizes, PM10 and PM2.5, as well as limits for dioxins and furans. There is a daily limit of how much and what type of materials can be processed in the furnace. Fritz would be required to keep a record of their metal usage. There are also requirements to properly operate and maintain the control device, which is the afterburner. And the afterburner would have to meet specific operating requirements, such as having a minimum temperature to make sure it's working properly. And Fritz would be required to record the afterburner's temperature. So, in addition to those other requirements, the proposed conditions for Fritz also requires a malfunction abatement plan. This is to prevent, detect, and correct any future malfunctions or equipment failures. Fritz is also required to have an operation, monitoring, and maintenance plan, which requires operation and maintenance schedules for the furnace and afterburner. Both plans must be approved by us, the AQD. There are also testing conditions to verify the furnace's PM10, PM2.5, dioxin, and furan emission rates. And Fritz must notify the AQD when the furnace is installed and starts operating. So I'm now going to hand it over to John to keep the discussion up.
Thanks, Amber. Hi, my name is John Lamb. I work in the Air Quality Division's Detroit District Office, and I'm the inspector for the Fritz facility. I'm going to briefly discuss district staff's role when a permit to install gets issued. Part of the district's responsibility is to determine if the company's operations are in compliance with the permit conditions as well as other state and federal regulations. We achieve this by conducting on-site inspections and reviewing operational and emission records to determine if the facility is operating in accordance with the permit conditions. This includes making sure the control equipment is being properly operated and maintained, monitoring the quantity and type of material being processed, and performing visible observations of the process and equipment while on site. Next slide, please. In addition, district staff also observe any stack testing required by the permit and review the results to verify the emissions are below the permitted limits. In this case, the proposed permit requires stack testing to verify the emission rates for PM10 and PM2.5 within 180 days of startup of the sweat furnace.
All right. Well, thank you, John. Thank you, Amber. Appreciate you guys walking us through the process, a little bit about what you do after the fact, or at least now at Fritz, John. So appreciate you talking about the inspection process and testing as well. So now we're going to shift over to a question and answer. If anyone has any questions, I'll just verbally go through how we can get those questions in front of our panel here. So panelists, if you want to go ahead and turn your cameras on, that would be a great thing. We do have some folks calling in. So just for anybody calling in, if you would like to ask a question, you can use #2 on your phone and that will raise your hand for us. You can also use that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen for other folks that are online and have any questions. You can type your questions in there. And if you would like to ask your question verbally, you can click that raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen as well, and we're happy to take your question verbally. So Caitlin, thanks for putting that in the chat too. Appreciate you reminding folks that they can put their questions in that Q&A box. So we'll give folks just a couple of minutes here to see if any questions pop up, and if they don't, we can always shift right into that hearing portion. But we'll give you guys a couple minutes to get those questions in, or raise your hand if you'd like to. We want to make sure we give plenty of time to get some questions answered if folks have questions. I'm not seeing any questions. Again, I'm happy to dilly-dally a little bit. I want to make sure that if somebody's typing a question in the question and answer box, we give folks plenty of time to do that. Certainly don't want to move forward if there's still questions. But that being said, If folks are on tonight and no questions are coming to mind, but after the meeting you feel like I have some questions, we'll definitely share how to get a hold of these folks a little bit later. So great. So my dilly-dallying worked. We have a question on the phone here. So your last four digits of your phone are 3904. So whenever you would like, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, good evening. I wondered, there's a slide that had a table on it, and I wondered if someone could read any of those numbers aloud for those of us on the phone.
Yeah, sure. We can go back to that slide. Amber, do you mind just scrolling back to that slide and then we'll talk through that? Also, for folks on the phone, if you would like to get a copy of the slides or anything like that, if you have an email address or you can go online, if you have an email address, you can always give Amber a call, give her your email address, and we'll make sure that we send a copy of these slides right to you as well. So Amber, if you want to just kind of talk through that, just go through like that left-hand column, the middle column, and then that right-hand column again for folks that are online or on the phone, sorry.
I'm going to go through each pollutant because I think that makes more sense than
Okay, yeah,
so
sure.
it's easier to compare. So this table says pollutant emissions from the furnace. There's 3 columns, and I'm going to go through each pollutant. So the first pollutant is oxides of nitrogen, or NOx. At the current location, they're allowed 2.19 ton per year. The proposed permit has 1.5 ton per year. The next pollutant is carbon monoxide. The current allowed emissions are 1.84 ton per year, and the proposed draft has 1.26 ton per year. The next pollutant is particulate matter, or PM. The current allowed emissions is 17.5, and the proposed allowed emissions is 1.75. And this is the same value for the other pollutant particulates of different diameters. So it's the same for PM10 and PM2.5 as well. 17.5 ton per year is at the current location, and at the new location for Fritz in their proposed draft is 1.75 ton per year. This next pollutant is sulfur dioxide, which has 0.01 ton per year originally in their original facility or original location. And it's the same for the new proposed draft. VOCs, volatile organic compounds, the current allowed emission rate is 0.17 ton per year, and the proposed in the draft is 0.08 ton per year.
Yeah.
So that's the contents of the table.
Yeah, thanks for walking us through that, Amber. So for the person who asked the question, hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions about what Amber just went over, feel free to raise your hand again. We're happy to talk through other aspects of it or give more information if that's helpful.
And I would just like to say, if you know, this is a lot of information. I understand that sometimes can be a little overwhelming. If you think of any questions later, I am available, and my information is with the public comment documents. So feel free to call me or send an email if you think of any new questions or you want me to clarify or you want a copy of this table.
Okay, we'll just give you guys to see if there's any other questions that might pop up. Again, no rush. We've got all the time we need tonight to get folks' questions answered. Okay, well, seeing none, I think I'm going to go ahead and skip the presentation ahead, and we will go into that hearing portion of the night. So I think you guys can tell I'm dilly-dallying again, just want to make sure we're not missing anybody's questions. But if my panelists want to go ahead and turn their cameras off, that's completely fine. And thank you very much for being willing to be on tonight. Greatly appreciate it. Annette, if you want to go ahead and turn your camera on, that would be great, and we will move into that hearing portion of the night. So before we do that, just want to talk briefly about public comments and what kind of comments can make a difference and what kind of comments might not be able to make a difference. Hey, Mike, you have your camera still on. You can turn it off if you want to. Either way, if you guys want to leave your cameras on, that's totally fine, but just letting you know. So comments that are most likely to lead to changes are going to be things that are focused on the content and the basis of the draft permit. Comments that request specific changes to be made. That's always helpful for us when we're reviewing those comments, but everyone is free to comment about anything that they would like to. So a lot of times we get comments related to folks that either want or don't want the project. That's something that we can't consider in the final decision, but we are happy to take those comments as well. Like I mentioned, everyone is free to comment on, anything in the draft permit. We're happy to take all of those, and we, like Amber mentioned earlier, we do consider those all the same. They have the same kind of weight. So whether you give your comment here tonight, whether you use one of the other methods to submitting a comment, all of those comments will be considered by Annette when she makes her decision. So the next thing I need to do is just read an opening statement to officially open up the hearing. We didn't have anyone who signed in and indicated that they wanted to make a comment tonight. So if anybody would like to make a comment tonight, we're happy to take your comment. And like I said, I'll go over other ways that you can submit comments after the meeting if you'd like to. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this public hearing. My name is Jennifer Dixon, and I am with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. And I will be the hearing officer tonight. Annette Switzer, Air Quality Division Director, is the decision maker for this permit application. She's listening to your comments this evening. She will be considering all comments before making a decision. This hearing is related to a request from Fritz Products Incorporated, located at 255 Marion Avenue, Rouge, Michigan. The company is requesting to add a sweat furnace to its existing facility. The Air Quality Division regulates sources of air pollutants to minimize adverse impacts on public health and the environment. The law governing those responsibilities is Part 55 of the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act. Before the company can install and operate any new equipment, it must obtain a permit that meets the requirements of Michigan's air quality laws. This means the equipment must be capable of meeting state and federal emission standards, including health-based standards. The proposed permit must also contain conditions that include emission limits and specific ways of operating the equipment to ensure these standards are met. The purpose of tonight's hearing is to allow anyone interested in the proposed permit to provide information we can use in deciding whether to approve the permit or if there are additional issues to consider. The proposed permit is still a draft permit. This does not mean a decision has been made. Instead, it reflects an initial technical review of the proposal. We hope having the details of the draft permit will help you provide comments. Everything in the draft permit remains open for comment and further consideration, including whether the permit will be granted at all. As we review comments, we can only use the information you provide to make changes if it is within our authority. For example, comments about local zoning, truck traffic, and noise cannot be considered as part of the decision. Some of you may want to simply express your support or opposition to the proposed project. We're happy to note your position, but please understand the department is, by law, not allowed to base our decision on whether there is widespread support or opposition to the proposed project. This hearing is being recorded, and your comments will be part of the information we consider in making a decision. The public comment period began on January 15 and will end at midnight on March 3rd, 2025. Additional comments or information may be submitted via written or verbal comment during this hearing by email or by voicemail. After the public comment period closes, all written and verbal comments will be reviewed. All significant air quality related comments will be considered, at which point the decision maker makes a final decision. The decision maker may deny the permit, approve as drafted, or approve with amendments. If approved, the decision must specify which provisions of the draft permit, if any, have been changed in the final permit and the reasons for the change. In all three scenarios, all interested parties, including everyone on the original mailing list, anyone who provided comments during the public comment period, and/or attended the public hearing, will be notified of the decision. The mailing will include a letter from the decision maker regarding the decision and, if applicable, the approved permit. Please recognize our staff are here tonight to provide a fair opportunity for you to express your views on the proposed project and to listen to your comments. As a reminder, you do not need to comment tonight to have your comment be considered. You may submit a written comment at any time during the comment period by US Post or email, or you may call in a comment to our public comment voicemail. I will go over how to do this after the hearing. Those of you online and not on the phone may submit your comment in writing tonight by typing the words comment into your question box. We will limit your speaking time to about 3 minutes. We don't have too many people on tonight, so if folks want to go over 3 minutes, that will be fine. If you're speaking, I will let you know when you have about 30 seconds or so left, though. We'll begin calling the names of people who indicate they would like to make a verbal comment tonight. And once we get through those on the initial list, anyone who would like to make a comment will be able to do so, even if you haven't indicated that you'd like to make a comment. So since we didn't have anyone who indicated they would like to make a comment tonight when they registered, we'll be taking anyone online just in the order that hands are raised. So if you would like to make a comment tonight, again, the ways to raise your hand, if you're on the phone, you're going to just press #2 on your phone to raise your hand. And then if you are joining us virtually, you can use the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen to raise your hand, and that will put you in the queue so that we can unmute your line and you can make your comment. Anyone making a comment tonight, if you wouldn't mind stating your name and any affiliation that you have for the record before you begin your official comment. So if anyone would like to make a comment tonight, please go ahead and raise your hands now. Annette, I'm not seeing anyone who would like to make a comment tonight. Are you okay with me going ahead and closing out the hearing?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. Just a brief statement to close out the hearing, and then we'll get to those few other things. So thank you for taking the time to participate in this meeting tonight. We truly do appreciate your interest in protecting Michigan's air quality. As indicated at the beginning of the hearing, the public comment period will close at midnight on March 3rd, 2025. All interested parties, anyone who provided comments during the public comment period, and anyone who attended this public hearing will be notified of the final decision on this proposed permit. The hearing is now closed, so thank you again. Just a couple things to go over before we close the meeting out tonight. So those other ways that you can submit an official comment, and because we have folks on the phone, I'm going to go ahead and read this out. So if you have a pencil and you want to write this down really quick, I'll just try to go slow in reading some of this information. So we're happy to take comments by mail. Those comments are going to be sent to a permit section manager at Eagle, so that's EGLE. Air Quality Division, or AQD, and it's P.O. Box 30260, Lansing, Michigan 48909. You can also email us. That's at EGLE-AQD-PTI public comments. So that's P as in Paul, T as in Tom, I as in Igloo, public comments, all one word. And that's at Michigan, all spelled out, .gov as in government. The easiest way to really give us a comment right now. It might be at voicemail, so go ahead and call 517-284-0900. All of the information that we talked about tonight, a lot of that background information and things like the technical details that Amber talked through are going to be available at our michigan.gov/Eagle Air Public Notice. And Eagle Air Public Notice is all one word. So you'll be able to find on there the proposed project summary, which is a high-level summary of the proposed project, has some other information in there as well. That technical fact sheet really goes into detail about the technical review that was done by this team to bring this permit in front of you. It's going to talk about some of those rules and regulations that Amber went over. Has a lot of really good information about the pollutants, et cetera. We're also going to be posting on there those proposed permit terms and conditions, so you'll be able to see those. And then we will post links to the recording of the meeting. We'll also send an email out to everyone on this meeting tonight. If we have your email address, we'll send you an email follow-up that includes the slides, the link to the information that I just talked about, link to the recording. So feel free to pass that forward if you'd like to, if you know of anyone else who might be interested. We would really appreciate that too. And then on the screen right now is how you can get a hold of our panelists. So because we have folks on the phone, I'm going to just go ahead and read Amber's contact information out so that if you need to get a hold of somebody, please feel free to reach out to her. If she's not the right person, she will get you to the person who can help you. So her contact information is browna39@michigan.gov. That's her email. So just the color brown, the letter A, the number 39 at Michigan, all spelled out, .gov as in government. Her phone number is 517-730-1158. So like we said, please get a hold of us. We're happy to answer questions if you still have them. And there's plenty of time still for comments with the comment period closing on March 3rd. So that is all I have for tonight. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us. We really appreciate this opportunity to talk with you tonight. If you need anything, reach out. And otherwise, Caitlin, if you want to go ahead and close the meeting, you can go ahead and do that. So everybody, I hope you have a really great rest of your evening.